Hello there, everybody. This is Matthew Lasar in person for the first time on my YouTube channel. And today I want to talk about what is historiography. And that is a nice long $10 word. And in order to understand it, you have to understand the basics of what is history. And that's pretty simple. History is the study of how human communities change over time. That is to say, history is always about change. It's always about how nations change, or any grouping of human beings, how they change. That's what history is all about. That's what makes it different from other disciplines like sociology and anthropology and psychology, which often tend to take a particular slice of human existence and do a deep dive into it. History is all about change and evolution. What is historiography? Historiography is the study of how historians have looked at the same historical subject differently over time. It's a very interesting subject because it studies how historical interpretations of various things have changed. I'll give you an example, perhaps one of the most famous examples. In the United States, after the American Civil War, there was this period called Reconstruction. Reconstruction was this time around 1865 to around 1877, when the southern states that had joined the Confederacy were repatriated back into the United States of America, and an attempt was made to do right by the millions and millions of slaves who were now freed people, or freed men as they were called, and to help them adjust to their newfound freedom, which they had won by joining, in many instances, joining the Union Army or by supporting the Union Army. The earliest interpretations of Reconstruction often said that Reconstruction was a failure, that the freed black slaves were not prepared for democracy, that they were not prepared for self-rule, that they were not prepared to participate politically in their southern societies, that Reconstruction was corrupt, that a whole lot of corrupt Northerners came down to the South and took advantage of the situation and stole lots of money from state governments. These are sort of the general interpretations of Reconstruction that you got after the Reconstruction period, which were very sympathetic to the Confederacy, to the former Confederacy. In fact, many of these historians argued that Reconstruction could be understood as a tragic era, an era of failure, of good intentions in some instances, but basically an era of failure. But as the 20th century emerged, as a new generation of historians emerged, more sympathetic to civil rights, many of them began to reinterpret the Reconstruction period, and they argue that yes, Reconstruction was a failure, but it wasn't a failure because the North had done too much for black Americans. It was because the North had not done enough. Most poignantly and importantly, it had not followed through with various promises to give land to the newly freed slaves. There was a brief experiment with that, especially in the Sea Islands of Georgia area. But once President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his replacement, Vice President Andrew Johnson, put the kibosh on that experiment, told it to stop. And that was a very important moment in which Reconstruction could have done a lot more for these people and declined to do so. Now, historians in the 20th century began arguing that the failure of Reconstruction was a failure of will, not of corruption and bad intention. It was a failure of the Northern government to do more to complete the revolution, which was the American Civil War, and make sure that these newly freed slaves had enough resources to fully integrate themselves into American society. That's one of the reasons why the civil rights movement of the 1960s was sometimes called the Second Reconstruction. In a sense, that name, the Second Reconstruction, is part of the historiography of the Reconstruction period. So that's an example of how historiography works. There are many, many other examples. Historiography is a very interesting field, often in which scholars look at not only the history of interpretations of the past, but they look at the interpreters. They look at the historians. Where did they come from? Who were they? What were their world views when they started to study this particular or that particular subject? So that's a brief overview of what historiography is, and I hope it's been helpful to you.